Christian cooperation. Part one of our text in Nehemiah 4 taught us, number one, that opposition will be present in the midst of ministry. We said that whenever, as like Paul said, whenever I want to do good, what? Evil is always present. And so whenever Christians gather for the unified purpose of following God, His will for our lives and for the body of Christ, opposition is going to always show up. And so we got to learn to expect it, learn to prepare, and be ready for it. Amen? Secondly, part one of this text taught us that ministry requires one to take a stance. Listen carefully. You can't straddle the fence in ministry. You can't straddle the fence being a child of God. The Revelator said in Revelation that God said, because you are neither hot nor cold, you are lukewarm. He said, I will vomit you. I will spew you out of my mouth. And so you have to take a stance. You cannot grow, you cannot become stronger without taking a stand, number one, on God and His holy and divine word. Somebody say amen when you can. And so you got to take a stance. And thirdly, it taught us that when you take that stance, your resolve grows when you trust God. Look, understand that God will call you individually, and God will also call us collectively to do some things that may not always make sense. It may not be logical. You may not have the best explanation for it. It may seem scary. It's going to be treacherous. But when you learn to lean on God, God will prove time and time again why we should always trust Him. Y'all not hearing me? There's an old song that said, Jesus, Jesus, how I trust Him, how I proved Him more and more. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus. Yeah, y'all know that song? Lord have mercy. And so it's a beautiful thing to trust in Jesus. Old Testament said, try me in this. To try the Lord and see, won't He open up the windows of heaven and pour out a blessing so much so that you won't even have room enough to receive it. That's Old Testament. New Testament, I recall there when Jesus told the disciples they had been fishing all night. Jesus told them what? To let your net down for a catch. And the apostles complained, Lord, we've been out here fishing all night. Ain't nothing out there. This is what we do. We are fishermen. There's nothing out there. But when they learned to put their own decisions aside, when they trusted God, they found out there wasn't just fish there, but there was so much that their net was breaking, so much so that their own ship couldn't even hold all the fish. And so again, it may not always make sense to you. It may not be popular. Everybody else may be doing something else. But when you learn to trust God, God will show you why you should always trust in Him. God is God. I've learned in my short 33 years that God is a God that when you trust Him, when you exhibit faith in Him, God will always give reciprocity. God will always bless you. Maybe not in the way that you want Him to, but He's going to bless you one way or the other. Moving forward, overall, this text teaches that the body is stronger together. Yes, they could fight, they could take their individual stance, but we learned that the miracle happened when they all stood on God, and they all stood on God collectively and in harmony, all right? We learned that when we cooperate for Christ, amazing things happen. Listen, there are some plans that we talked about last Sunday, plans that are in place. They seem like it's too much for Virgin Street, but what is too much for us is never too much for God. I read somewhere that with men, nothing is possible, but with God, what? All things are possible. So we have to learn to cooperate for the cause of Christ. So as we get to the second part of this text at verse 17, part two of the text continues in this way. Two things that we'll point out, and we'll let you get on your way. Point number one, according to verses 19 and 20, we emphasize the premise of the observation. Somebody say observation. Yeah, the observation right here in verse 19 and 20 of the text. The Bible says there, Nehemiah said, Then I said to the nobles, the rulers, and the rest of the people, the work is great and extensive, and we are separated far from one another on the wall. Verse 20, he said, wherever you hear the sound of the trumpet, Nehemiah said, rally to us there. Somebody say rally. Rally to us there. Nehemiah said, our God will fight for us. Last week, the text opened by emphasizing the opposition of God's people. We're not only called moving forward to consider the opposition of God's people, but today Nehemiah in the text calls us to observe. Understand, when you look at ministry, ministry is not naive. Ministry or God is not ignorant or unaware of the difficulty. Nehemiah didn't ignore the adversity. Nehemiah didn't ignore the opposition, but Nehemiah took time to observe not only the difficulty of the work, but he observed how the work was affecting the people of God. Again, he didn't ignore the challenges. He rather acknowledged them. And as children of God, we must learn not to ignore the challenges that come in your life, the challenges that will come against the body of Christ, but we have to acknowledge them. One of the aspects that help us from a psychological standpoint is that you never improve until you acknowledge the difficulty and the challenges that you're currently facing. And so I'm not here to give a message of hope that says you'll never deal with trials or tribulations. I'm not here to say that while God is going to bless us, that doesn't mean that we won't experience our fair share of burdens here or there, because you most certainly will. But before we receive the blessings of God, we must endure the burdens that come and go with life. Before you are assured in God, you must endure your due share of affliction. Somebody say amen when you can. And so due to the fact that Israel's leader and the prophet, the man of God, was willing to not ignore, he was not naive, but he acknowledged, observed the challenges. Due to this, Israel was able to strategize accordingly. What do we see here in this text? We see that each was dependent on the other. While again they were strong and had their individual resolve, the resolve only grew when they learned to depend, number one, on God, and they also learned to depend on one another. What do we learn from this? Number one, we take away that the individual and the collective body is most successful, and when we learn to practice the concept of endurance. Somebody say endurance. Again, listen, as a child of God, you must go through and endure some things in your life. Paul talked about how we must run this race with patience. This race is not given to the strong or the swift, but it's given to those who what? Who endure. He also said there will come a time when they will no longer endure what? Sound doctrine. They will have for themselves what? Itching ears. And they will create for themselves their own doctrine. And so we have to endure through life. We have to endure spiritually as well. Again, God's word will call for us to do some things that may not be according to our own personal preference. But again, this ministry and our very lives are no longer our own, but they belong to God. Listen, when you enlisted in the army of the Lord, when you agreed to give your life, to die to Christ in baptism, and you were resurrected out of that watery grave of baptism, you no longer were yours. You may have your secular name, but you wear a new spiritual name, and that name is child of God. That name is better than what? Sons and daughters. And so we now have an inheritance being a part of the Lord's army. But that inheritance will not be yours if you don't fight the good fight of Jesus Christ. Secondly, we learn, let us not be naive or ignore our challenges, but remember that God fights for us. Understand that when you stand up for God, God will stand up for you. But if you are fake and lukewarm and here today and gone tomorrow, God will not fight for you. God will not stand for you. And so in this ministry, being a part of the bride of Christ, being individual members of the body and the collective whole, we must not ignore the challenges, but we must embrace them and we must endure them. Is that all right? So not only do we see that we're called to observe, number one. Secondly, according to Nehemiah 4:21-23, we're called to consider the obligation. Somebody say obligation. Again, the obligation. If you're tuning in online, type in that word, obligation. Right here in the text in verse 21, the Bible says there, so we labored in the work. Nehemiah said, and half the men held the spears from daybreak until the stars appeared. Verse 22, it said, at the same time, Nehemiah said, I also said to the people, let each man and his servant stay at night in Jerusalem, that they may be our guard by night and a working party by day. Verse 23, Nehemiah said, so neither I, my brethren, my servants, nor the men of the guard who followed me, none of us took off our clothes except that everyone took them off for washing. Secondly, in this point of obligation, we see that the Jews were both persistent and consistent in their labor and love for God and one another. Y'all see that? We saw in the text, Nehemiah records that they constantly held their weapons by their side. Not only were they always ready for battle, but they also were ready in position. They remained in Jerusalem. Then it says, even when it came time to bathe, they still had their weapons close by. And so you say, well, preacher, that sounds like a lot. If you study battle, typically when nations are at odds and they're at battle, they would come to the front lines and come to the trenches. They would stand and wait to see if anyone was going to make the first move. But what you'll find that when oppositional nations are at odds, you'll find that for an extended period of time, if no one makes a move, the two parties will agree and go back to their territory to retreat and relax. But what you find here is that in the case of Nehemiah and Israel, there was no reprieve. There was no rest. There was no time to retreat. Nehemiah said that from day all the way until night when the stars appeared, they remained in position, they stayed ready, and they continued to build. Lord have mercy. I didn't expect a lot of shouts there because none of us really want to endure and want to stay locked in. But again, Nehemiah says that yes, while traditionally people would retreat for relief and relaxation, but Nehemiah says that because the work was so important to us, and that the enemy was surrounding us, we didn't have time to relax. We didn't have time to let our guard down. We remained in position. We stayed ready for battle, and we constantly build even at nighttime. Y'all ain't with me, but this is true. If you look even in our world today, when you look at construction companies, you'll find that at every point in our city, something is always being constructed and worked on. And you'll find that there are times, depending on the contract and depending on what's being constructed, being built, or being rebuilt, that there will be times when it's night or where there's inclement weather that the builders will stop building. But then you'll find that if they're building something that is heavily and severely a great need to the community and to the citizens of the city, you'll find that even at nighttime, they become so sophisticated that they will post up lights that will help the workers see so that they can work even at nighttime. And what I'm saying is that Christians ought to be, children of God, ought to be so committed and so persistent to the work and the ministry of God and the church that if there's an opportunity for us to do overtime, we ought to do it. Oh, don't get quiet on me now. When boss man says we got some extra hours so you put in that you can get time and a half, or some jobs like mine, if you're on overtime, they'll even double your salary. We're quick to get out there and work for the man. But it's sad in the church that when the children of God, when the body needs Christians, needs people in the army to put in some overtime for God, I can't do it today. Catch me next time. Oh, if you would have given me a front notice, I would have been there before you were there, preacher. Y'all know what I'm talking about. We'll come up with every excuse in the book not to be about the business of God and the church, but I wish we had a church that could be dedicated from day even to night. Listen, the ministry is not limited to the four walls of the sanctuary or limited to 513 East Virgin Street, but I've learned in my life that the church is not a building, but the church is a body. And as long as there's blood running warm in our veins, we ought to find something that our hands and our hearts can do. Listen, we may not be assembling on every day of the week, but you can pick up that phone and call somebody and tell them, hey, I'm thinking about you. You've been on our sick and shut-in list for a while. I'm just calling to let you know that your church family, we're thinking about you and we're praying for you. Someone who had a prayer request, they're dealing with something very tragic or very heartfelt in their life, we ought to be a body that's not only praying for them in the moments that we're here, but we ought to be a people of prayer every moment, every day. Well, I read somewhere in the Word that we ought to be praying, what? Without ceasing. Y'all know the word, yeah. And so what we see with this commitment was effective because each man felt a sense of obligation to God and their fellow man. They were equally concerned about their fellow man as they were their very own lives. In other words, when they saw their brother or sister struggling, they regarded their brother or sister's lives as equally important, if not more, than their very own lives. And as the Christians, the modern day church today, that's the mindset that we have to have. Moving forward, Brother Smith, beneath the zeal of the individual, the key component of the cooperation was not just their persistence, not just their consistency, but a key component of their fellowship is what we see in the variable of the trumpet. I don't miss that. The trumpet was vital to their success. This wall was, if you study, was not just some small wall. It was not a wall like what we see here where a few people could build on it, but this wall spanned a good amount of territory that protected Israel. And so in order for Israel to build, all of them had to be willing to be individually strong and go to different parts of the wall and to successfully secure it over time. But because they were a great distance away, one could not simply shout and everyone could hear. And so what was necessary, they had to have a tool or an instrument that every man could hear, whether they were close or far from Nehemiah. So when that trumpet was blown, everyone could hear and rally to one another. In other words, when the trumpet was blown, that was a symbol or a sound that it's time to come together. It's time, as I said a couple of years ago, there's a key Swahili term called harambe, which means let's pull together. And so when the trumpet sounded, that was the indicator that I have to leave my station and come to the rally point and join together with my brother and sister and be ready to fight. Y'all don't hear what I'm saying? This is not the first time that we see a trumpet. You can go back into Joshua 6. We were just there in Bible class on Wednesday. We know that if you look at Joshua 6, the Battle of Jericho, we know that story and that narrative very well. For 6 days, they were told to navigate around the city once a day. But on that 7th day, they were called to walk around the city walls not once, but 7 times. But Joshua specifically told them, when you're walking, make sure you keep your mouth closed. But when the trumpet sounds, that is your time to shout, because God is getting ready to take the walls down and give us the city. And just like in Joshua 6 and Nehemiah 4, Nehemiah said, when you hear the trumpet, that's when it's time to come together. Oh, that's not the only time that children of God have, number one, heard a trumpet, but I read somewhere in Revelation when time is called to its end, Gabriel is going to sound the final trumpet. And the dead in Christ are going to rise first, and we'll rally, we'll come together and hear God's voice say, well done. Oh, I don't know about you, but I'm ready for Gabriel to sound the final trumpet. I'm ready because I know that when Gabriel sounds the final trumpet, that's our symbol. That's our indicator that God is calling time to its end. God has spaced out the army all across the world. But when the trumpet sounds, oh, Christ is going to descend. Oh, y'all not hearing me? When Christ was alive, he had to stand before Pilate. But when Christ comes back, Pilate is going to have to stand before him. Y'all don't hear what I'm saying? Yeah. When Christ was alive, he stood trial. But when we get to God, we're going to have to stand trial before the great council. Somebody say amen when you can. And so, listen, I'm ready for Gabriel to sound the trumpet. Because when he sounds it, that means I'm going to be right there with God. Yeah, the captain of the army is going to gather all the saints to heaven, and he's going to judge us. And when you're faithful, you don't have to be afraid of death. When you're faithful, you don't have to fear death, because death is not the end. It's only the beginning. Somebody say amen when you can. And so, yeah, just like the trumpet was a symbol in Nehemiah 4, just like the trumpet was a symbol in Joshua 6, the trumpet will be a great symbol. Because everybody will be scattered all throughout the world. So God is going to use that trumpet. Listen, you don't have to, somebody be asking, well, what's that trumpet going to sound like? Don't worry. You'll know what it is. It's going to be a sound that no man has ever heard before. And even if you're unfamiliar with the trumpet, just look around. Song said the clouds will be rolled back as a scroll. And so if you don't hear the trumpet, look around at the elements. God will fix it so that you'll know when that time has come. The word says there's going to be a time where every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. Yeah. And so listen, I know it sounds crazy. Well, preacher, you're only 33. Are you really ready? Listen, when you trust God, again, it may not make sense. But if God called time to its end right now, look, I've said my prayers. And I've given God my very best. And if you decide to call it right now, God, let your will be done. Listen, that's the kind of faith that you ought to have. It's not saying that you're going to be perfect. We all going to mess up. We all going to make some mistakes. But if you know in your heart that you've given God your best, you don't have to worry. You don't have to fear. You can look all across Scripture. Every man, every woman did something that dishonored God, but God still used them. Y'all not hearing me? David committed adultery, killed a man. God still called him a man after my own heart. Peter lied and cut a man. Peter had an uncontrollable tongue, but God still let him speak. Y'all not hearing what I'm saying? Saul used to be an opponent of the church, but now he's the apostle that wrote a good majority of the New Testament. Y'all not hearing what I'm saying? Moses was fearful and a coward, but God still called him to lead Israel out of Egypt. And so I don't care who you are. Every single one of us has done something to dishonor God. But oh God, because of the death of his son Jesus, God can bless us in spite of us. That blood is our atonement. It covers us. It cleanses us from all sin and unrighteousness, so that when God looks at me and looks at you, God doesn't have to be wrathful. God doesn't have to kill us, because Jesus already paid the price. The debt has already been paid. And so our job is simple. Serve God in his army until I die. Is that all right? Do I have any soldiers in the house this morning that's willing to fight for God, that's willing to stand for God, not just day, but at night? Do I have any soldiers in the Lord's army that's willing to put in some overtime, that's willing to get off the pew, but get on the front line, that's willing to get out of their place of comfort, but get into a place of discomfort where God will challenge you to exceed not just your mindset, but go beyond what you can think or ask, willing to stand up and show out for God, because God always shows up and shows out for us. Listen, I don't know about you, but when I think about how good God has been to me, I can't wait to serve. I can't wait to worship. I can't wait to clap my hands. I can't wait to pat my feet, because God has been better to me than I've been to myself. Yeah, I'm ready to serve, even if it means I gotta die. I know that sounds crazy, but that's what it means when you're in the army of God. Oh, be thankful, because there was a time and there are places in the world where Christians are still being killed because they claim Jesus Christ. And so you got to be thankful that you live in a country where we have laws that protect us. But even though we have laws that protect us physically, no earthly law can protect you from the spiritual enemy that is always surrounding you and is always trying to get you off base. And so because we have a spiritual enemy, as Peter said, behold your adversary the devil, who roams around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Because we have a spiritual enemy, like Paul said in Ephesians, we have to have the whole armor of God. Lesson's yours. Come on, stand to your feet. I think I've said enough. To encourage us. Go to my last slide, Brother Smith. And so, there's many of us, but we're all called to function at one. Listen, Israel, Judah, they were only successful when they individually committed themselves, but they also committed themselves to the leadership of God's men. And so it's not just about trusting God, but it's also about trusting the leadership that God has put in place. It's not trusting the leadership to be perfect, because the leadership are men and women just like you. But it's trusting that even through their flaws, God will still use them in a mighty way. Why do you say that? Because God still uses you in a mighty way. And so it's learning to exhibit grace to others as grace was given to you. Is that all right? And so there's many of us, but we're called to work and function as one. Different gifts, different assignments. Some was the watch party, some were the soldiers, some were the workers, some were the informants. Everybody had a role, everybody had a function. And so it's learning to work in your capacity and understand that as I'm doing my job, I'm trusting my brother or sister to do theirs, and all together we are functioning as one. Amen? 3 takeaways, and I'll let you go. Number 1, know that we're most successful when the collective body agrees. Again, it's not saying we're not successful without it, but we're most successful when the collective body is in agreement. Secondly, regard your life of your brother and sisters as your own. If I'm hurting, I pray that there's somebody in the body that is praying for me and that will look after me. Why? Because if I know a brother or sister's hurting, I pray and I have the strength and the will to do the same for them. That's how the body remains intact, and that's how the body remains strong through the power of God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. Lastly, remember the trumpet of God. Just like that was a symbol in Joshua 6 and Nehemiah 4, that is still a symbol for God today. The beauty is, even if we die before the trumpet sounds, doesn't matter. That trumpet is still relevant to our lives today. Remember, time in this world is going to end. The dead in Christ will rise first, and judgment will begin. God's got a place for his soldiers, but God also has a place for his enemies. There's no gray area with God. You're either his friend or you're his enemy. You're here as a member of the body of Christ. You've committed and enlisted yourself in his army. But like any army, there are soldiers who stray, soldiers who struggle and have different afflictions. This is a time for prayer. This is a time for comfort. This is a time for restoration. Come on back to God. Now, remember the body of Christ. If you're not in God's army, you're in somebody else's. The goal is that God wants all. That's why God said, "What whoever has an ear, let him hear." God wants all to enlist in his army. While the call, commands, and expectation of this army are not easy. We talked about opposition. We talked about observation and enduring through things. While it may not be the best right now, but trust me, when it's all over, you won't worry about what you had to endure here. You'll say, all that I went through, it was all worth it in the end. And the other army, the alternative, you can have the best life. Satan will bless you too. But the thing is, it only gets worse from here. It doesn't get better. It can start out good. You feel good, feel blessed, people in your corner. But in that judgment, you're going to a place where God is not. No more prayers you can pray. Can't offer anything else. Can't sing no more songs. Not enough songs you can sing to merit anything from God. And so it's your goal is you want to get in God's army, if not in it now. That happens through baptism. As we said, it's important to hear that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Hear the gospel. Hear all that God is and all that God can do for you. Believe in that. Hebrews writes that he that comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a reward of those who diligently seek him. Coming to him as you are, agreeing to change your heart, change your mind, change your life, that from this day forward, I will do my best to live for him instead of living to sin. Put him on in baptism and put you in the family of God. It enlists you in God's army. It gives you access to the captain, all that God is and all that God has for you. What's your desire? Need prayer? Need salvation? Come on now while we sing a song of invitation.